Hi, I'm Mike Overly, author of Guitar Encyclopedia. This is Guitar Forum 2.0. Welcome back. Tonight we're going to talk about harmony inversions, and it's a topic that is covered in this book, and this is the Guitar Encyclopedia. Let's get a shot of it down here. And we're going to cover pages 146 and 147 of Encyclopedia, and on those pages we will discover harmony inversions. Now, harmony inversions begin with a surprising concept of harmony, perhaps. This is surprising, but it sounds like a surprising statement. And what that is, that harmony, contrary to what you might think about harmony, harmony actually begins with one sound. Now, the reason why we can say this is because if I make one sound, let's say, for example, I play A on string 6, fret 5, it only becomes harmony because I'm now going to define it as being the first sound of other sounds that may follow to create what is normally understood as more than one sound called harmony. But actually, in fact, this now becomes the first sound of harmony. And therefore, harmony can actually be thought of as only one sound. And therefore, if you had a simple 1-4-5 progression, you could actually play it just 1 and 4 and 5, and you would actually have the first sound of what later on in this program will turn into, let's say, chords. But harmony begins with one sound. Now, generally speaking, though, harmony then, in most people's minds, begins with when we say harmony has two sounds. And the harmony of two sounds is called an interval. And an interval is just the distance between or difference between those two sounds. So if we take our example now of this first interval that we're going to use, we're going to take what is traditionally called the perfect fifth. So I'm going to go to C on string 6, fret 8, and that would be the first sound of a C major scale. And now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will be the second sound, which is going to be tone 5, and now I have tone 1 and tone 5. Now that tone 1 and tone 5 is known in traditional harmony as perfect fifth. Now the important part, though, about this harmony of two sounds is that it introduces these two really important words, and they are melodic and harmonic. Now simply stated, melodic means one at a time, and harmonic means at the same time. So if we take that perfect fifth interval of 1 and 5, and we play them one at a time, then we would call that a melodic interval. 1, 5. Now, the amazing thing about playing these intervals is that if I play this first sound and then play the next sound by letting go of the last one, then I truly do have one sound at a time. But the important part is it doesn't sustain. There's no sustain. So tone 1, when tone 5 is played, leaves. So we only hear one sound at a time. Now it's possible to play those two sounds, the interval of a perfect fifth, in a different way, which is to play them one at a time, but to sustain. And when we play these sounds one at a time and sustain, it's called arpeggiate. So here's 1 and it's still ringing, it's sustaining, and now tone 5. So in the end, or the accumulation of those two individual one at a time sounds, culminate in harmony of two sounds, but they weren't played simultaneous. They were played one at a time, but since they're sustaining, then you hear two sounds. So this is a big deal. Melodic can be played both one at a time, individually, or one at a time and sustain. So one at a time, don't sustain, one at a time, and sustain. Now, the next part of that would be that if we take that interval of a perfect fifth and we actually then do play them at the same time, now I'm going to use a pick and a finger and pluck them both simultaneously at the same time, then we have what we call a harmonic interval. So we can have these only two sounds of harmony, the perfect fifth, 1 and 5, and play them in so many different ways. One at a time, don't sustain, melodic. One at a time and sustain, still melodic, but arpeggiate, to get the word there, and simultaneous at the same time, which would be called harmonic. Now, after 2 sounds of intervals, then comes 3 sounds. But this 3-sound concept, which most would say is a triad, is actually only a triad if those 3 sounds are 3 different letters. Now, this is a big, big deal, because traditional music, first of all, will tell you that a triad is 3 different notes. And that's so wrong that that doesn't even define anything, because if you took that literal definition of 3 different notes in traditional definition of a triad, you would say, well, how about if I have a quarter note and a half note and a whole note? And then they go, that's not even what we mean. And then you would say, well, why don't you say what you mean? So in other words, it's not 3 different notes. It has to be said only in this way, 3 different letters. And then the concept is, if you have 3 different letters of the triadic harmony, then you're definitely going to have 3 different scale degree numbers or tone numbers. So if we say that we have a C major triad, then that would be these 3 letters, C, E, G, and those 3 letters, C, E, G, have 3 tone numbers, scale degree numbers, 1, 3, 5. So here is C, that would be 1, here is E, that would be 3, and here is G, and that would be 5, and that would be a C major triad. Now, that C major triad, which was 3 different letters that results in 3 different tones, if you then say that a triad is 3 different tones, then again, you can be proven wrong, because you would say, okay, well then I'll have tone 1, tone 8, and tone 15. And even though I have 3 different tones, 1, 8, and 15, in fact, I have the same letter 3 times. So C and C on the 4th string and C on the 1st string. So you cannot say what a triad is in any other way except it's 3 different letters. And of course, 3 different letters will result in 3 different tone numbers or scale degree numbers. Now, the concept of this triad thing is that it then introduces this harmonic concept and melodic concept of these 3 sounds. So if I play 1, 3, 5, 1 at a time, then by definition that's called an arpeggio. Now, an arpeggio is not arpeggiate, and that's where things get confusing for guitar and for any harmonic instrument, piano, whatever. So if I actually now take that 1, 3, 5, and in the 2nd octave, 8, 10, 12, and 15, I have a C major arpeggio, and that was played 1 at a time melodically and didn't sustain. Now, if I accumulate those sounds and play those that I can, for example, 1 and 3 and 3 and 5 are on the same string, so I can't play 3, 5 at the same time, but the octave of 3 is 10. So therefore, I can play 1 and 5, and the octave of 1 is 8, the octave of 3 is 10, and the octave of 5 is 12, and the octave of 8 is 15. So now what I have is actually, in encyclopedia terms, a circle 6-1 C major chord triad. Now, the concept of this chord, though, is that we can now play the chord in different ways. And those different ways are, we can play them as what most would say is a chord, which would be that you would strum the chord. And they would say, oh, well, that was simultaneous. But the concept of a chord would have to be that you would have to use some combination of your fingers to be able to play them actually and really simultaneous. So the only way you can play simultaneous guitars on the guitar is if you actually, in fact, use your fingers. If you use a pick, a plectrum, then it's impossible to play more than one sound simultaneous. So what actually is happening when you strum a chord, you're not really playing a chord anyway. What you're really doing is you're strumming the tones of the chord, but you're strumming them one at a time and sustaining. And that's called arpeggiate. So if you take a chord and you can arpeggiate slowly, play each individual tone one at a time and sustain, that's called arpeggiate. And therefore, that was a slow arpeggiation. Now, most would confuse that with an arpeggio, but an arpeggio doesn't sustain. Or if it did, it would actually be arpeggiating the harmony of the triad. Now, when it's time then to say, I want to strum a chord, well, you say, well, you really can't. But what guitar players accept is that since you're going to now arpeggiate very quickly, then they say, oh, that happened simultaneous, but actually, in fact, it didn't. So, in fact, if you use a pick, you really can't play a chord by definition. But a guitar player accepts this and says that if I arpeggiate very quickly, it's a chord. But if I arpeggiate slowly, it's an arpeggiation. So that's a big deal in terms of what you can actually do with a pick. Now, that leads us to our next concept. If we have now these three tones, 1, 3, 5, and a C major triad would be the letter C, E, G, so C, E, G, 1, 3, 5, then if we play this harmony, and it could be different forms. This is a circle 5-4 of a C major chord, and a 5-1 of a C major, and a 6-3, and a 6-1, and a 4-1. Those are all C major triads in different locations, forms on the fretboard. But what they all have in common is that they all have tone 1 as the lowest sound, and therefore the lowest sound is called in the bass. So therefore, now we have our first definition of our harmony inversions, and that is that when you play a triadic harmony and you put tone 1 in the bass, it's called zero inversion. Now, the big deal on this, and the way I'm saying it, zero inversion, is traditional music doesn't say zero inversion. In other words, zero inversion means zero means not in this sense. In other words, it hasn't been inverted because it's still C, E, G and it's 1, 3, 5. Therefore, it is zero inverted. Traditional music calls tone 1 in the bass, the inversion for that, they call it root inversion. Now, I have a problem with root, even though it's traditional and I understand that. But root is from a different subject. That subject is botany. And root means, of course, the lowest part of the plant that's in the ground, so I get that part. But if you ask someone what follows root, what comes after the root, well, it doesn't make any sense, because in botany, I guess you would say, I don't know, you would say, well, what comes after the root is the trunk. And then would come the branches, and then would come the leaves, and then would come the berries. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. You're not even speaking music, if you ask me. So therefore, zero inversion means that it's actually where you begin. And easily enough, what follows zero? Every little kid will tell you, 1. So as long as we're in the numeric understanding of our inversions, we're good to go. So instead of root inversion, it's zero inversion. And now we have this zero inversion C major chord, because now I have tone 1 in the bass, and this is 1, 5, 8, 10, 12, 15. Okay, so with that said then, it would lead us to the show really, in a sense, that say, well, what can I do with the zero inversion? And if I do something, which is in fact play songs, then what's going to be the result of playing songs in zero inversion? And then this is our next concept. It really focuses you on the bass, on the lowest sound of the harmony. And when we play harmony progressions, one harmony that follows another, in this case one chord that follows another, although it could be one arpeggio that follows another, what you will hear is that the bass jumps around. And that's the nature of the zero inverted songs, let's call them. And therefore, an example of a zero inverted song would be like G goes to C. And you notice that that G was low and it jumps up to C. So a G major chord, that would go to C. So you have that jumping of the bass. You could, now that particular progression, 5-1, is called a perfect cadence, and that'll come up in other things. Now if I play F to C, then that's 4-1, and that's called plagal cadence, 4-1. And now, to finish this up in this follow the bass kind of concept, jumping around, I would have deceptive cadence, which would be 1, goes to 4, goes to 5. So 1, 4, 5. But instead of going back to 1, like the cadence would do, 1 to 4 to 5 to 1, the deception is it's going to go 1 to 4 to 5, and those were all major chords, and now it goes to A minor, which is minor 6 of the C, but actually you modulated, you changed the tonal center and went to now 1 minor in the key of A minor, and now you're in a different key, and now you're in a different key, and you got different parts. So we have this perfect cadence, 5-1, plagal cadence, 4-1, and the deceptive cadence, 1, that minor 6. Therefore, what we have now is we're listening to this root motion. So this root motion, let's say that we had a progression that went A to E to G to D. So we'd have A major, E major, G major, D major, and you'd have that. And what that is sounding like is pop music like, where it jumps from tone 1 to another tone 1 is really what's happening. A is 1 and E is 1 and G is 1 and D is 1, that kind of concept. It's just jumping around all the time. And then, of course, there's just many, many, many progressions that would use that 1, 4, 5 thing. Just a super simple example, as we have to move on, would be, let's say, Knocking on Heaven's Door, where you have G is 1 and D is 5 and C is 4. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. So that is an example of those jumping around in the bass concept. Now, as we move to the next inversion, now we find that we're into the second inversion. I mean the first inversion, sorry. We had 0 inversion where 1 is in the bass, so C, E, G is 1, 3, 5, and when you put 1 in the bass, then you have 0 inversion. And that was what we just played examples of, the bass moving around like that all the time. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to invert. Now, the definition of invert means to flip or to turn. And in that flip-turn kind of way, our C, E, G, which is 1, 3, 5. Now, this flip and turn concept would come from like staff note. So when we have the staff note, we would have C at the bottom, tone 1, and then followed above would be E, tone 3, and G, tone 5. So you'd have this from bottom to top, C, E, G, 1, 3, 5. So what we're going to do is, in this first inversion, is we're going to make 3 be on the bottom, which means that we have to take that C tone 1 and flip it to the top. Now, traditional music then again fails in this accuracy of labeling by saying that now it's going to be 3, 5, 1. But of course it can't be 3, 5, 1, or else you just said what 0 inverted was out of order. So what it really becomes is 3, 5, and 1 flips up to 8. So it's 3, 5, 8 is the C, E, G. I mean, not C, E, G, E, G, and C. And then in musical terms, you can actually call those C's, those other letters, octave letters, prime letters, and you would say that it's E now, tone 3, G, tone 5, and this C prime is tone 8. So there's ways to always clarify which one of those C's or which one of those tone numbers are you actually talking about. Anyway, the point being is that we have now the major triad in first inversion. Now, first inversion then says put 3 in the bass. So if we have now this C major chord that we did, 0 inversion would say put 1 in the bottom, put 1 in the bass. But now here's 1, 3. So now if we take the C major chord, there's that 8, 10, 12, 1, 5, 8, 10, 12, 8, 10, 12. That's a C major chord in 6, 1. And now put 3 in the bass. We've made the C major chord sound different. Instead of 1 in the bass, we have 3 in the bass. Now, what happens in that context then is that it makes the harmony progressions go smoother, like there would be an F, like one chord F, and then 5. And if you played it in in zero inversion, 1 is F and 1 is C. Then you'd be jumping around in the bass. But if you play 1 is F, but now the C is not in zero inversion with 1 in the bass, but it's first inversion with 3 in the bass, you get this. And that smoothness of the bass is actually now called walking bass. And that's where walking bass begins, that you're making a much smoother connection between the two chords instead of, so here's your F and here's your C in first inversion, rather than here's your F and here's your C in zero inversion and leap around. So if we were to take that progression that we had previously in zero inversion, that A and E and G and D, A, E, G, D, that jumps around in zero inversion. Now if we play the same progression, but use actually some zero inversions and some first inversions, then instead of jumping around, we smooth it out. So what I just did there was A and zero inversion, because that's tone 1. Now E in first inversion, because this G sharp is 3 of E. So this is your E major chord, and there's the 3, or underline 3, lower than 1. And then G is 1, and then D with F sharp in the bass, which is tone 3. So it smooths the A, the D, G, E with G sharp in the bass, G, and D with F sharp in the bass. So instead of sounding poppy, rocky and poppy, it's all smooth, it's jumping around. It all now in first inversions, using first inversions, it smooths it out. So A, E, G, D. So the point is, you have the same harmonies really, A, E, D, G, D, but because you change those inversions, you change actually the way it sounds, and that's a very important concept. Finally then, we come to second inversion. So just like we had C, E, G, 1, 3, 5, and then flipped C to the top, and then made it E, G, C, 3, 5, 8, or C prime 8, now what we're going to do is we're going to take tone 3 and flip it to the top, and now it becomes G, C prime, E prime, and then that would be 5, 8, 10. And now 5 in the bass. So if we had our C major chord in zero inversion, 1 would be in the bass. First inversion puts 3 in the bass. And now second inversion puts 5 in the bass. Now that 5 in the bass concept then changes into, now it can become what we call pedal tone. And pedal tone means that we're going to keep the same letter or tone number in the bass, but connect it to the next harmony. So in this case, we would have a C major chord that would have 5 in the bass, which is G, and then that would go to G major. So it creates this pedal tone, reoccurring letter and tone, that G, C with 5 in the bass, going to G, and that G is actually zero inverted because now G is 1. So the amazing thing is, according to what letter of harmony you're playing, the letter of the bass becomes a different tone number. So when you're playing C goes to G, like a plagal cadence 4-1, now it's same thing could happen in a different key like A, and you would have A with E in the bass, which would be A with 5 in the bass, and then that would go to E. Now the amazing thing about that A major with E in the bass, that has what we call a suspended sound to it. So this is when we get into other shows and talk about enharmonic chords and how the same chord can function differently, and function means how it works in the song. So this A with E in the bass really sounds like E suspended. That goes to 1A. So 5, 1, 5 suspended, 5 major, and 1. Now A major chord in second inversion, 5 in the bass, has that suspended sound and then resolves to the E. And then usages of other things like Elton John's Saturday or something would take a D major chord with 5 in the bass. So there's D, and there's the 5 of D, A, and then go to A. Modulate. Now, the second inversion, of course, is extremely important and used in many, many things. But since we're running out of time here, I'd say that one of the most iconic uses of the second inversion would be Hendrix's Wind Cries Mary. If we played Wind Cries Mary in 0 inversion, it would go E flat, E, and F. So you would have E flat major, E major, F major. And then if you went, you say, well, that kind of sounds like it a little bit, but not really. So what Hendrix actually did, he utilized the inversion concept. So he took the E flat, which would be in 0 inversion, but he put tone 5, which is B flat. B flat is 5 of E flat, and he played it with second inversion E flat. And when you play it that way, then you go like, that sounds just like it. Then what he does next, he puts first inversion of the E flat, F, and G. So here's an E flat in 5/4. He puts tone 3 in the bass. So he has that 5 in the bass on the E flat in 5/1, circle 5/1. Then he goes to the 3 in the bass. But to make it sound one more way like him, he takes that 3, and this will be other lessons that will happen, and he hammers the 3 from tone 2 and goes, and actually plays it up here. So there's your 3 in the bass. So 5 in the bass, 3 in the bass. And that takes care of tonight's show. That is Harmony Inversions. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that you go out and open up your songbooks and realize that all those slash harmonies, we didn't really get into it that way tonight, but when you have a letter and it has a different letter after a diagonal line, that's called slash harmonies, and slash harmonies are related to the inversions that we talked about. So, till next time, I wish you all the best of all good things, and see you later.